York City, but in fact are sitting there in Russia. Now, of course, with the invasion of Ukraine and really the atrocities that have been well documented and more are being investigated, we can't easily say anymore that Russians are the greatest victims of the Putin regime. But in ways other than bombing and murdering civilians, children, mothers, grandmothers, grandfathers, after you include that, then of course the larger number of victims of the Putin regime are not Ukrainians, but ultimately Russians. And there's how many of them now that have fled?
So your powerful, precise, rigorous words are stand in a stark contrast, I would say, to my very recent conversation with Oliver Stone. And I would love you to elaborate to this agreement you have here with his words and maybe words of people like John Mearsheimer. The idea is that Putin's hand in this invasion of 2022 was forced by the expansion of NATO, the imperialist imperative of the United States and the NATO forces. You disagree with this point in terms of placing the blame somehow on the invasion on forces larger than the particular two nations involved, but more on the geopolitics of the world that's driven by the most powerful military nation in the world, which is the United States.
Yeah, Lex, so let's imagine that a tragedy's happened here in New York and a woman got raped. We know the perpetrator. They go to trial, and Oliver Stone gets up and says, you know what? The woman was wearing a short skirt, and there was no option but for the rapist to rape her. The woman was wearing lipstick, or the woman was applying for NATO membership and just had to be raped. Didn't want to rape her, but was compelled because of what she was doing and what she looked like and the clothes she was wearing and the alliances that she was under international law signed by Moscow, all the treaties, that sovereign countries get to choose whatever alliance they belong to. Treaties that the UN Charter, signed by Russia, the Soviet Union. The 1975 Helsinki Agreement, signed by the Soviet Union. The 1990 Charter of Paris for a New Europe, signed by the Soviet Union. The 1997 NATO-Russia Founding Act, signed by the Russian government, the post-Soviet Russia. All of those documents signed by either the Soviet regime or the Russian regime, which is the legally recognized international inheritor, right, successor of the Soviet state. All of those agreements are still in force, and all of them say that countries are sovereign and can freely choose their foreign policy and what alliances they want to join. Let's even go farther than that. You don't have to go farther than that, but let's go farther than that, Lex. Is an autocratic, repressive regime that invades its neighbors in the name of its own security something new in Russian history? Did we not see this before? Does this not predate NATO expansion? Does this not predate the existence of NATO? Would Oliver Stone sit here in this chair and say to you, they had to impose serfdom in the 17th century because NATO expanded. They had no choice. Their hands were tied. They were compelled to treat their own population like slaves because, NATO expanded. I could go on through the examples of Russian history that predate the existence, let alone the expansion of NATO, where you have behavior, policies, actions very similar to what we see now from the Kremlin. And you can't explain those by NATO expansion, can you?